But today, first and foremost, we because we were we started the Galaxy just came out as a release concept ship, and hopefully it is going into production like the leaks said it was. All the leaks on the Galaxy have so far been accurate, so we'll see with this next roadmap update if it's actually going into production or not. But the Galaxy is the first modular ship that's been introduced by CIG in quite a while. Um, Gosh, I can't even remember which one was the last one. If you can remember in chat, let us know. But we thought, hey, let's talk about modularity. Because everybody looks at the modular ships and like, oh, this is cool. I'll be able to swap out these things and do a whole bunch of stuff. It'll be a Swiss Army knife. And I think that we all agreed that there's a lot more to modularity that players might want to consider, especially before investing in more expensive modular ships. Like the Galaxy is pretty reasonable for its size, but the Endeavor is going to get a price increase eventually. That's another modular ship. In either way, these ships, some of these ships are hundreds of dollars. The Retaliator is probably like the cheapest modular ship. And so we thought we would talk about modularity and the ins and outs of modularity, and then do a little bit of speculation about it as well. So we, in order to sort of preface this conversation, back during the original stretch goals, way back when, the $65 million stretch goal, the very last one, was enhanced ship modularity. And so I'm going to pull up the link real quick, and I'll just read a couple bits of it at the end. There we go. And it's just so you have the ship of your dreams, but really wish that it could be customized to suit your needs a bit more than the off-the-shelf models. This new goal, a massive undertaking, is going to be of interest. We are looking to overhaul any suitable ships, including the Cutlass, Avenger, Retaliator, and Redeemer, to allow many modular components to be available as swap outs.
Cutlass,
So
really?
yeah, but remember, this is from a much different time, so take it with
Oh
a grain
yeah,
of
yeah,
salt.
yeah, yeah.
And they have
Just
one of
take
the
that
other
bulkhead
links.
out.
Yeah, well, one of the other links that I put in our show
Not a
notes,
big deal.
and I'm gonna go ahead and drop these. Let's see, links in the chat so you guys can follow along with what we're talking about. Um,
You want me
Oops,
to read the summary? You talking about
I want that link.
the modularity discussion?
I'm just
Because
gonna
I got
drop
that
these
up.
links in chat, and then and there's also a series of posts that CIG did
Yeah.
that I always like to go back to, which is the shipyard posts, where they cover a whole bunch of things. When they first came out with the Matrix of Lies, they prefaced all the information that's in it with all these shipyard posts. And the Matrix of Lies is very unreliable, but the information in the shipyard posts has really done a good job of standing the test of time. And you can go read all of them by clicking the little links in the article. But the one of note today is the shipyard post on variants and modules. And so we whenever we're preparing for these episodes, we thank you. Perfect. Yeah, I was about to nailed it. Whenever we're preparing for these episodes, we always come up with some talking points and things that questions that we have that we think are things that we are considering that we want to make sure everybody else is considering as well, or at least batting around. But then we also come up with some ideas that we come up with. And to start this off, I'm gonna do I kind of like the Paul Shelley Astropub method of bouncing these questions off of the guys below and letting it go from there. But I'm also going to keep each section to try and keep it to about an hour or so we're not running over for too long. But Nightcob, I wanted to see what you guys have to say about the cost, um, not of the module itself, because we know that we'll be able to buy them in game. You can buy them with real money now, but eventually you'll be able to buy them in game. But not only how much do you think modules will cost, but how much do you think it will cost to change them out?
So I'm hoping they're appropriate costs. I'll be honest with you. I know I struggle with a lot of people when you look at U.S. dollar or currency equivalent cost of a ship
No, I
versus
want you
what
to
it
put it
costs at AUAT.
in Iraqi dinar from circa 2003.
That's about like
I'm not,
UEC.
Yeah.
yeah, that's true.
It's not
I
far
don't know.
off.
God, you're asking me to do mental math, and I don't know what's the value of the yen right now. I'm gonna need a spreadsheet. No. So what I look at is what we have for the military that I'm aware of, or at least that I deal with. The only big modular things that we have in the submarine force are vertical payload tubes, which you can basically substitute out for vertical launch systems on board the newer Virginia class submarines, and that allows some form of modularity. And then you've got like logistic escape trunks that can be modularized in forms of like special operations forces or soft deployment. So different style of modules and what we're talking about, right? CIG is going kind of like the industrial route, and then the military modules seem highly specialized to the ship, which is what I expect. But those are not inexpensive things, and they are not small things to change out. So what I hope they get right is it is an appreciable cost, and it's a very appreciable cost to change one out at, say, like Cousin Crows. Like, it should not be a small thing that you are changing out a module in a spaceship to maintain hull integrity, uh, to uh, give immersion to the sense that what you're doing is you're basically you're executing a really, really big ship alteration. Granted, it is approved and it's designed to be done. It should cost you money and it should cost you time, and I hope that that's reflected to some degree. Because I think I like that level of immersion. If you're going to make me sit in a 2-minute elevator ride, I like the idea that I might have to have a ship down in Cousin Crows for the better part of like a game day to get an entire module for a near capital class ship changed out. That's not a small deal for a bunch of people to do.
Especially if it
Not in the
scales
real
based off
world.
of size, like between the
Yeah,
Retaliator and the Galaxy.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and I wanted
it
to,
should be one thing for the Galaxy and another thing for like an Avenger Titan to swap out its like cargo bay area. I agree
yeah.
with that.
Um,
So time commensurate with size
mhm. Yeah, time
and
and,
money
Cost
and
too.
cost.
commensurate with
Because
size.
that
Yeah.
you're probably also paying, a good amount of labor costs, and I wouldn't, I mean, that the money is essentially simulating labor costs, for someone to do the work. And I think that's a good, it kind of makes sense that Cousin Crows is at Crusader because they have those open air shipyards, in order to reduce costs, because you don't have to be in a spacesuit, in vacuum floating around to work on a ship. I think that makes a lot of sense to have Cousin Crows there for that kind of work to be done. I hope that we'll see other. Well, that's another question. And before I ask what your thoughts are, Attira, I also wanted to preface this. As I talked about it on Paul's podcast, there's two major blockers to modularity coming into the game. One is that the people who are working on persistent entity streaming and by extension server meshing, but really it's a PES limitation. They have to do work on the item port system in ship object containers. Ships are built in pieces that are stuck together, and so they have to make it so that way when the ship object container for a module uh, streams out when you're moving, replacing with something else, that it takes its item ports with it. So, for example, the Retaliator, if you're taking the torpedo module out and you replacing it with a dropship module, right now the way it works, those torpedo item ports are attached to the ship and not to that module, not to that object container that the module is. And so you stream that out, the item ports are still there, and so you go to get in the dropship, and then all of a sudden, the pilot, lands at a station, clicks reload or rearm, and all of a sudden you've got torpedoes falling into your lap in the dropship seats. That's an example that John Crew used. So there's that work that has to be done. They've done what they needed to make it work for Squadron 42. They just need a little bit of work in order to refactor that system to make it work for the older ships that are supposed to be modular, like the Retaliator. That's why the Retaliator got its gold standard work. At the same time, they're doing what's called OC room swapping, object container room swapping for the Retaliator. It's on the progress tracker. The other bit of work that has to be done is the modules have to be able to plug and play into the resource network. So if you swap a module out, it has to be able to get power, and based off whatever item ports are in that module, like its function, it has to maybe get coolant, power, and it has to be able to have gravity and atmosphere. It has to, your atmospheric scrubbers, whatever, how that works, that all has to work as we're swapping out the modules. And so that was the other thing that John Crew talked about in a recent SCL in the last several months. So, but they're doing that work now. That's the thing, is the blockers are essentially either being worked on or nearly done. The back-end tech blocker is essentially going to be done here very shortly. And the resource management, resource network blocker, if you go look at the progress tracker, CIG is all hands on deck on the ship content teams on two things: resource management and the Squadron 42 gold standards, the gold standard work, the vehicle support for Squadron 42. So, there's that. Attira, what are your thoughts on the cost of modularity? As far as buying the modules, as far as being able to swap them out. What are your thoughts?
Hey, all right. Glad to be
Oh,
here.
he's got notes. Uh-oh.
No, I was just thinking about some of my recent experience in my real life job, and I'm going to apply it to this conversation.
Ooh.
So, one, I don't know that we can even predict what it's going to cost. We have no idea. The prices aren't fixed in game. Everything, we don't know what professions are going to earn. We don't know what additional money sinks we're going to have eventually, and then and we don't I don't think we have a good picture of what ships are going to cost. If I were to speculate right now what it might cost, a module they'll be prorated based on function, right? So I think the most useful is the medical, right? And you're purchasing and installing tier 1 through 3 beds, which are going to be expensive. And I think that's going to be 75, maybe 750,000. If I were to just guess off the top of my head, refinery, less, another complex piece of equipment, probably 600. And then cargo, maybe less, 250,000. I mean, cargo is just an open space with a gravity cargo grid on it, right? It's nothing really special. Some cranes.
The only other thing is the tractor beam cranes, but yeah, compared to the med beds and the refineries, for sure.
Yeah, high-end technology assigned with those, it just doesn't seem that big. So that's what I think it would cost to buy. I would say I don't know that Cousin Crows is the greatest place to do it, because Cousin Crows, you're not in a zero-G environment, and I think moving around gigantic hunks of metal in gravity is still taking a risk. Whereas if Cousin Crows,
I thought it was near close to, though. That's like why they picked that area to develop the Hercules.
It's close, and it's going to save on energy. I think they would do even better if they were doing it in space, where they could just kind of go bink and it would shift a little bit, and then
I do think that we're going to see a lot of differentiation between because like RSI's big capital class shipyards are out in space at a Lagrange point.
Yeah, and I think that's where this kind of activity should take place. And I see somebody in the chat, Cousin Crow's customization, standard shops should be able to swap modules. I don't know about standard shops. I agree.
It's
with
specialty
Nikon,
work,
for
sure.
This is a pretty big deal. It's a major structural change, but I think it would take place at a Lagrange point where you have stability and you can move these things around with tractors and very precisely kind of control their movement, versus in gravity, where if you screw up, it just, it can fall, even if it's just a little bit. I mean, that's kind of interesting. Anyway, the next piece I'm going to say is when you talk about the speed at which, the rapidity at which these can be installed. So I got to tour a very interesting, I'm not going to plug them, manufacturing line a week and a half ago. And it would be ironic if one of them was watching this or saw this, but okay. So
Don't get
they
yourself
have,
in trouble.
no. They would just recognize who I'm talking about. So they're the only one kind of in the industry that does this. So they have a bunch of F1 Formula One fans, and they took some lessons learned from Formula One, and they're building their product with the same type of attach and detach capability as a lot of F1. So if you see, like, if a bumper gets rocked right on a wall in an F1 race, and they pull into the pit, they will literally push in and lift off. Right, it's just a catch. The bumper or the front wing, they'll throw it aside. They'll pop on another wing. Any electricals that are in there, any fluids that are in, all have quick release, quick catch sockets, and it just goes right in, done, boom, instantly reintegrated into the system. And so they are, it's all quick release, absolutely. So they're instituting the same thing for assembly, disassembly of this potentially, maybe one day, tactical system. And I would call, something that has to be assembled and disassembled on the battlefield rapidly, and go off and achieve its mission. And so you pull out of the box, you do all this, everything, fuel tanks are in the wings, you freaking plug it in, it quick latches, and away you go, next part. So all that complicated bullshit is to say, I would imagine 900 years in the future, and if they're not thinking this way, they're silly. For some things like this, right? I mean, this is going to be purpose built with some type of integrated quick attachment system. So as this module slides into place, right, on rails, right, nice and slow, it's gonna have to sync up with pre-built power, pre-built oxygen connections, pre-built everything. So I don't think it's gonna take too long to necessarily exchange these things. I think the most would be laying in the welding on the exterior hull plates and making sure that it was secure in place. And you're nodding your head, and I know you're like, I know what I'm, all about that. But 900 years in the future, we don't know what we're going to be able to do. And
it's an efficiency thing, though. Like, I'm with Tree in the sense that, don't get me wrong, I'm with you on some parts of this. Like, I would hope that we're better about putting things on rails. The honestly, I actually think the hull welding thing should be the easy part and stuff like that, because modules should be designed to be roughly the same size, take up the same slot, so to speak.
Mass, balance, everything.
Yeah, exactly. But the problem, I think, is actually more related to power couplings, the relay network, the efficiency by which you direct power. Like, everything, every foot of cable has a cost. You lose efficiency to a component based on more cabling, based on where you're directing that power. And I know you're talking about, like, okay, well, we'll design the efficiencies to support that modularity. But the truth of the matter is, and kind of in relation to your example, right? Similar modules require less adjustment for that same efficiency and the same cable routing. But when you're talking about grossly different modules, like, it's one thing to say, all right, I've got a module and it's geared for, just a slight variation in weapon configuration, or a slight variation in the torpedoes that I'm using, or a slight variation in the even the medical. Like, it'd be one thing if you're like, all right, I'm switching out a module from a tier 1 bed to 2 tier 2 beds. Okay, well, the function is still, I have the similar power requirements and similar logistical requirements for medical. When you say, okay, I'm going to switch out an entire module that is dedicated to medical for a module that is dedicated to a refinery, all right, well, now you're talking about an entirely different power setup. You're talking about different cable ratings. You're talking about different relays, because you have vastly different components in that module. And although it might be easy to slide that module in structurally, like you are essentially talking about retuning the ship to support the new module, and that's
Yeah.
what you have to adjust for. So, that's kind of like the module thing that I think they're going with that idea. It's like, oh, it's an entirely new ship now. It's an entirely new purpose. Well, even in the military, we don't do that. It's not like I say, you know what, that's a military frigate right there, but if I just take that section of the ship out, I can make it a medical frigate. Like, no. What you're doing is basically at the modularity level, if you're doing that kind of stuff, is like, okay, it's geared toward this type of mission that's delivering, uh,
Yeah, modules
Tomahawk
on
cruise
Navy ships
missiles.
are mission modules. They're not
Exactly,
converting
exactly.
the entire ship's function.
Yeah,
So
because that would be a
I
big
guess my
deal.
point is though is and one of the things I'm having to is there has to be some gamification of this, right? So
Mhm.
Well, yeah,
some right, and so I think Jared said it. When did he say this? It was right at the start of the IAE ship talk, whatever they called that video. You take it all the way as real as you can, and then you dial it back to fun, right?
yeah,
And I
Right.
think
So
all of
it's
that
not like
is
we're going to be doing that work. I think the gamification is in the how long does it take and how much does it
how much
cost.
does it cost?
right. And so in that regard, if we were going to talk, expect modules to be swapped out, I would say like a refinery module, which is clearly going to have just an extreme power draw capability. It may not when it's idle, but when it's at max, it's going to be drawing a lot of power.
Yeah,
That might take the longest to install because again, that takes into account everything Shree's Nikop's talking about. So you gotta account for the wiring and adjust the power output of the freaking
Flux capacitor.
power plant, the capacitors, right? And maybe you have to install industrial capacitors in an industrial size 3 power plant to account for the power draw of the refinery. And then maybe a combat module will handle everything else. And I think that would be fine.
yeah, and I think from that standpoint, I agree with you that the cost commensurate with size would be not only commensurate with size but function. So
Right.
the cargo module, that's probably the cheapest. You need two tractor beam looking things, at least based on the concept art, and other than that, it's
Barely
just
any
space.
power requirements. Yeah.
Yeah, barely any power requirements. And then you get into medical. Okay, that's kind of a highly specialized thing. That's going to cost you money. Honestly, I look at the refinery as like that's probably the most expensive one. That's it's not even
Well, I
just
guess
that
it
you have
depends on
enough
what
power.
I think
It's
it depends on
specific
what
power.
they say about. Yeah, it is specific power, but like, gosh, I mean, you're a floating respawn point.
Well,
with those
so you're paying
beds.
for function at that point in time, and don't be wrong, the function is what very useful. But I mean, honestly, like I look at it from a standpoint of like how much is it to tool a cargo space into space that just powers some medical beds on a low power function? Whereas if you're talking about reactors, because they keep using that term when they talk about refineries, which don't be wrong, gets me interested. But when we talk about refining in like the high temperature, high pressure style environments that we're talking about, my brain goes back to like nuclear reactors and what's required for that. That's not a small deal. You have to. It's not even just enough to say, okay, well, I've got cableways and I've got relay networks that support high power, high pressure, high temperature operations. That stuff has to be shielded. That stuff has to be precise.
But that
and
would
that costs a lot of money.
Wouldn't all of that come with the module though?
It would,
all
but then you have to tool the ship's power output to deal with that kind of stuff.
Right, and that's where I think they could get creative, right?
Mhm.
So maybe the only power plants that can power a refinery module is an industrial power plant.
I think that would be a great idea, and I think that makes sense. And I
And
would
then-
actually put a minimum tier for it too. Like anything less than a C is not going to cut it.
Well, C is the lowest, so it would have to be like industrial.
It would be
B.
kind of interesting if you could make it like if you
Oh, is it? I thought they
if you
D.
had if
Do they have
you
D?
had well, and that so
I thought they only
that's
had
actually
A and B, CBA.
a good lead into our next question is the constraints for modules, for changing them, because the Galaxy is a large ship, and it has large power plants and everything, and that's a good potentially a good way of adding in trade-offs. Not only is the cost of modularity, you have to buy the module, you have to pay to have it installed or have them swapped out. But then if you are running a ship with a class C civilian power plant, and you go from having a cargo module to the increased power requirements of the refinery module, because that makes a lot of sense that a refinery module would consume more power because it is hooked
Yeah.
up into the resource management system. These things are going to consume power. It's part of the prerequisite for it. And I could totally see it where, okay, we have this new module in here, it's going to take more power, so you don't, you can run everything, but you have, in order to run it, and it means that it's drawing more power, so your shield recharge is lower, your ability to refill your capacitor banks on your turrets is lower, because you have power dedicated to the refinery. And when you're not using it, you could shunt. That's engineering gameplay. Okay, we're not in a refinery
Yeah, I was
operation
waiting
right
when we were going
now.
to bring that back in.
Yeah,
Well,
Back
if
to
I
last
if I
week,
can
that's
if
what
I
I
could jump
expect.
in,
yeah,
have you ever played the game Satisfactory?
yeah, satisfactory. And then
So you
I love
you
Colony
pulled up your
Sims.
power
So
plants, and you put up your power plants, and you run all your cabling, and it's just an absolute mess. And then you put down one miner or one refinery too many, and the whole system
mhm.
shuts down, right? Because you're overtaxing your power supply.
Yeah.
So if you once you turn that, it could be, when you talk about refining mini games as a part of this modular setup, right? And maybe you only have to worry about it really in the refinery, because that's the only thing that's, as you say, reactors and all this other stuff. But the engineer is constantly balancing power, and if you suddenly have, maybe the shields can't be on while you're refining, or maybe they only charge you
Yeah.
50%, and if you
Yeah.
maybe you have to adjust your power on the ship to account for full production, or maybe it's just it produces and refines slower, right? And so as you go up in tier of industrial uh, power plants that can produce more power, and industrial capacitors which can manage that power flow, right? Then you have a lot more leeway with how much power you can put into it versus shields versus weapons versus everything else. And I think that would, and then I don't know, I assume they're going to have like military, industrial grade, civilian grade relays.
Yeah.
So maybe
Or at the very
you would,
least subcomponents. Very least subcomponents.
Yeah.
yeah.
Like
So you
for
might,
your power plant.
yeah. So then you could go in and plug in either your subcomponents for or your relays for managing that level of power. And I don't know, maybe they're not maybe the industrial ones aren't as shielded. They allow you to emit a little bit more energy. The military
No.
ones are a little bit more protected against EMP. I mean, who knows? I don't know. However they want to balance that shit, but
I'll
and if
offer an
you,
opinion real quick on that because I agree with you. And I know this is theory crafting, and I don't want to dive too much into theory crafting, but if just in case anybody's like listening to this or listens to it later, I hope that's how it goes. Industrial should focus on efficiency. That's what industrial and maybe civilian to a degree have always been about, right? That's what you expect. Whereas military is hardened components. They are geared to survive battle damage. So I would always expect like that would be the trade-off. Like you want military grade components and subcomponents, well, they're going to be a little bit more hardened against um, like things like distortion damage and just damage in general. But man, industrial, it's all about the efficiency, and you're going to sacrifice that hardening for efficiency because you're always trying to be cost effective.
Yeah.
I want to be
right,
able to run the refinery for longer at peak output while consuming the least amount of hydrogen fuel via my power plant. That makes sense, and that should just. It seems diegetic to me that that's how they would go. I don't know if they've thought about it, but that's what I would expect. And obviously, they just haven't gotten that far in terms of like component. What's the word I'm looking for?
specificity,
Diversification. Yeah,
diversification. Yeah.
diversification. Yeah, but I hope that that's where they're going. Um, so I agree with you, and the modules should live up to a similar specification. I would expect the moment you swap in a refinery module, just expect that you've lost a lot of hardening for your ship in terms of the areas that those components are located in. Like, so they're more susceptible to damage and distortion damage, and those fuses are going to blow easier. and that relay network is now more susceptible to damage. But your power plant is now potentially more efficient if you have the right power plant, like military hardening mixed with industrial grade components. That I would hope that they build it so that doesn't necessarily mix that well, and maybe you lose some efficiency, or maybe you gain efficiency with the more industrial you go with in terms of components.
Yeah.
And again, that's engineer gameplay. Like, I'm hoping there will be players to be like, yeah, Captain, we can switch to that refining module. Here's what we're going to need to go buy if we want to be any kind of efficient out in the black with regards to components. I've already done the research. These are the components, the subcomponents that we need, and this is where engineers make their money.
Yep.
And I look forward to that style of gameplay. I know that's theory
Well,
crafting, but
that
that's
would
what I
fall
hope.
right in line with what they've done for mining,
Yeah,
right? I mean, and I think that would be only I would say that with mining they miss the mark because some components that they put in and some components are absolutely useless, and
Yeah.
other components are almost always used. So you'd
Well,
have
it
to
takes
you'd
there's
have
a
to
lot of
actually
balancing to do still, but
yeah
I like that there does seem to be they're adding the ingredients in order to create a system of trade-offs, of pros versus cons, of
yeah.
hard of decision making, instead of just decision making based off of your own priorities, or what you're caring about. Because the scenario that popped up in my head, and this popped up after watching the last little Jax McCleary video, was the Corsair got hit by probably one of the pyro flares. Something essentially knocked it out. The Corsair's shields weren't running because it's in quantum, and so it got hit by a pyro flare and got disabled. Well, if you are in your galaxy and you have the refinery module, and you are doing some refining
I like your
for
verb.
nice. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, I like the verb.
write that
That's
down.
good.
It's new. But if you're doing
Refining,
some
refining.
refining,
I like refining better.
yeah, refining. It's more refined.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
I'm down.
But if you're the Akiro cluster in Pyro is supposed to have been mined of the easy to get to stuff, but there are still supposedly very valuable minerals and materials there. So people are going to be mining in the Akiro cluster in Pyro. And if you've staged your galaxy somewhere nearby where your miners can go back to it and get stuff refined, well, okay, now a flare comes along. The big wave of whatever that damages your ship or knocks out relays or what have you. And you're in the middle of a refining job, and you've got a civilian power plant, and you're like, I don't know if we have enough. Can you shut down that refining job in order to divert the power to shields so that way you don't take damage, lose relays?
Not
That's
if you're
the
doing
kind of
quantum.
yeah. Oh gosh, that's if you're can you sustain what would be the impact on your quantum speed, because you need power in order to generate that quantum field. If you're trying to run your refinery at the same time, can you even do that? Can you generate enough power to to do all that? And that's that Nightcob, like you were saying, the engineering gameplay, the decisions, the hey Captain, we can't do that, or we can do this, but not quite this, and that's the decision making that I it seems like they are working towards, and that they've hinted at a lot in the past. But it's really fun and engaging to think about, especially when they have all this evidence that that's what it's going to be. It isn't going to be a super simple arcadey process.
And I think if I can just jump in before we go
Sure.
too far away from this, they also should have components that add shielding
Mm-hmm.
or stability or whatever you want to call it. So if you're doing something industrial,
Don't
in
spoil it. We're going to
a
get into that.
no, I know, but if you're this is on the same topic.
Okay.
If you're doing something industrial in a place, right? Then
Cheers.
you
Like, I've
could
looked at the show notes. I know what I'm doing.
I know what I'm doing. Let me alone. You could trade some of your efficiency of these subcomponents for instead stability or shielding, right? That then allow you to kind of operate a little bit more safely. So if you're in Pyro and you're going to be mining in a place where flares are likely or flares are going to impact you. You might put one of these things in each of your subcomponents so that you have a little bit more chance of surviving without losing everything, right?
Yeah, you
And
might
then,
want
or
to
two,
reconfigure more than just the module.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not just reconfiguring the module, you're ship to operate in that area, and depending on what you're going to do, and you might choose to run with those all the time in pyro because you never know when something. But the second you head back into Stanton to go pwn noobs, right, you're going to change all that out for high performance mods that allow you to do that because you're not worried about flares anymore. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's another piece of that, because you should be able to account for that at the cost of something else. So instead of having that Brant module that gives you that 2% more green, instead, right, you have I think that's the Brant module. You have one subcomponent that is focused on just stability in case a flare hits or some type of lightning strike or something. It insulates your ship a little bit better and the components therein. So
Mm-hmm. One more question, and then I'm gonna preface this now because I want you guys to be thinking about it while you're answering this question, because it's a shorter one. We came up with ideas for different modules that we might see for the Galaxy, because they did say that they're going to be doing a manufacturing module and then others in the future. And so we kind of brainstormed a few that we thought might be interesting ideas. So I want you
well,
guys
some of these came from your community. Let's be
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah. When I say we, I mean everyone. But I want you guys to pick the list that we have, take a look at it and pick the one that you think is the most likely or that you like the most, and then tell us why here in a second. But before we do that, I just want to ask both of you guys, and I'll start with you, Nightcob. Do you think that we'll have the ability to transport modules ourselves?
No, I don't think so. I kind of hope not, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's kind of it puts you in a weird spot, right? So I get the idea of, you buy a module from a certain location. I feel like it has to be from a place that's going to be able to support the installation of that module. At least logistically, it makes sense to me that way. Like, I just don't imagine that you're going to be, I mean, imagine the size of ship you're going to need to fly around one of the modules for the Galaxy.
Hull E.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, like, that's also just like I mean, are you going to tear it down into pieces? I wouldn't expect it to go
So
as one singular piece for a Galaxy.
that's another thing I saw the community talking about. They're talking about, would you like quarter it, and then each of those quarters then goes into one of those the Hull E things, and then but then you get into it, right, Knight, and you said you got to put that thing back together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
here's what I
yeah.
think. I think it's going to be gamification. So and it's going to be similar to the ship claim. That's honestly what I think. It's going to be ship claim, like just for a module. So maybe you can request it at a landing zone, and then, God, I forget the ship. What's the ship that delivers the ships? They've already got it in lore. It's not concepted
It's
or
the
anything.
Crusader Jupiter.
Oh, the Jupiter.
Yeah, the Jupiter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some Jupiter I can see being as like the craft in the background that brings it to whatever place you're at. And maybe then, if it's a landing zone that's got a place that can support the installation, okay, you can do that. And that's why, all right, well, I can claim it at this particular location. And then I can go down to the local, I'm going to say Cousin Crows simply because we don't have other options yet, but like
Yeah.
local Cousin Crows to install this module if I'm not residing in the system. But that's a long way off.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, I see it though as it's going to be gamification. I don't think you're ever going to be able to transport it because it's going to be a separate entity I just don't ever see being physicalized. And I
It's
don't
gonna
see
be
a reason why
Quanta.
they would physicalize. Yeah, it'll be
It's gonna be
Quanta
Quanta.
basically doing it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I saw another. I was paying attention to the comments on this question. I don't know why. Like all this week, somebody else was saying, like, if a pirate, like an NPC pirate or a player pirate, intercepts by chance the Quanta that is carrying your thing, then you just get a note on the terminal that says experiencing delays. We apologize. It just takes longer
Your
for it to
package
get
has
there.
been lost in transit.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
the Quanta got intercepted and
Your package that cost
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of UEC got lost in transit because we took a shortcut and shipped it through Pyro.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. So
Yeah.
somebody said Voyager Direct. I don't know if that,
Well, and
but I
Blizzbrad makes a good
definitely
point because like the Galaxy modules are huge. Like the cargo module for the Galaxy holds 500 some odd SCU itself, and that doesn't even take up the whole thing. Like there's a lot of space left over. So that
It's an
those
awkward shape
modules,
too.
yeah, those
Yeah.
modules are ginormous. Well, then you've got
Yeah.
like the Endeavor. How does the Endeavor? There's no way you can move the Endeavor modules around without some sort of specialized thing to do it. And so that's why, like with the Cousin Crows makes the Kraken conversion into the privateer. That's what they do. Is they they not only do customization of your little ships, but they also do the installation of these customization options, like modularity. And so that's what, like, I kind of agree with you, Nightcob. And I think it's probably going to upset a bunch of players in that, oh, how come I can't just load it up in my ship and transport it? Because it's massive, and how would you, okay, well, they would just take it apart and put it into, 64 SCU containers, and ship it. Okay, that's still a whole bunch of those things, that, you're talking about the amount of work to disassemble that module. It's
Not only that, but what happens if you get interdicted and a pirate like shows up and like, now they got like a soft F moment or, whatever it ends up being in the future. And it's
Yeah.
like, do those pieces, they steal half of it. What are you left with?
claim it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and then at that point, you're kind of like, what was the point of this game? Cool. I could have shipped it, but I mean, I had to break it down, and and I don't blame them. That just feels like, okay, well, we've got to be reasonable about this, and that makes
Yeah.
sense to me. Like, just Jupiter it, and we already Jupiter the ships. It doesn't make sense. I don't think at least not any day, anytime soon, is ever going to be the gameplay for a Jupiter pilot to be transporting ships on insurance claims for players. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah.
Give Jupiter.
It'll happen in the background.
In
and
30 years
things will go
from now, my
poof.
kids can tell me about the Jupiter.
I do think though, but for Alpha, I do think they will insert as a component, and I think that when they do institute some type of quanta-based transportation to get it from point A to point B, and then you have to install it, and you have to install it at a special location for a price, I think then you'll see a lot of people get butt hurt and angry, but it'll be like, but okay, they've taken it up to real, and they are going to bring it back a little bit, but they're still going to they have to have money sinks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's a good money sink.
This is going to be a money sink, because like, and they kind of, and also CIG is a little weird on this, because they're like, you want to be this one day, then you want to be this the other day. That's modularity. Okay, but if all of that's free, right, then what are we spending our money on? We already have very little to spend millions and millions of credits on that we can earn in game.
That's
So
such a separate conversation, though.
that's
I do want
it
to
is.
Let's talk about money sinks one day. Let's put that down in a note.
Yeah, but the idea of paying a quanta to bring your thing to you, right, and then paying another quanta to install that for you, and it's not going to be immediate. You are going to have to plan your gameplay sessions, right? Hey, the Oregon's going to go mine next week on Saturday. Who's that asshole with the Galaxy? Okay, you get that into freaking Cousin Crows or whoever, get that module changed out, and be ready to go. Okay, Roger, okay, I went and did that. Now I'm going to wait a week and go do something else in the game while that's happening. And then, okay, hey, it's Saturday, it's go time, let's go. That's not a hard plan to execute. It's just going to take a little thought. If you don't do it, you don't get it.
And it's the primary game loop. Planning is the primary game loop. It is the primary game loop of Star Citizen. I love it. All I want now, once they get it to that level, is I need a little app on my phone to like show me the timer on how much longer in Cousin Crows and stuff like that. That's what I want.
Yeah,
want
so
to-
it
I want
goes.
push
Your phone goes
notifications.
ding or beeps like a microwave to let you know
I want
your
push
galaxy is
notifications
ready.
that Cousin Crows is done with my galaxy. Like that's what I want.
Well,
Get me
Yeah,
there, and
it's
I'm
just like if
down.
you take your truck to the dealership to have maintenance done
Yeah.
or have an upgrade put on.
No. When you're in game, you need to get a phone call on your Moby, right?
Yeah.
You hit accept, and they get somebody to voice act. Hey, you're this is Cousin Crows. You're ready.
It's got to be
Bye bye.
like a guy.
And then it hangs up.
Like,
That would be.
it's got to be like a
intense.
gamified version of one of those guys that does like the all the different custom reality TV shows where they customize cars and motorcycles or boats or whatever. It has to be one of those guys.
Oh, another stereotype.
Yeah, it has to be a total stereotype of the guy who would be behind the counter, working at Cousin Crow's. Hey man,
See, but I go
got
the
your
other
galaxy
way.
ready, and there's a few hiccups, but we got it taken care of. I think you're going to be really happy with what we got going on for you.
See, but I go the other way. I'm from Alabama, right? You just got this grease monkey mechanic covered in motor oil and grease. His hands are filthy. He picks up the phone. He calls you, hey man, your car's ready. All right, I'll see you in an hour. Click.
Maybe there'll be different types of places. Like that'll be the one in Magnus, in Borea. The crappy city where Drake is headquartered. It's going to be just a poor grease monkey doing that, and the Cousin Crows is like
the extra bolts are in a box in the trunk. We had some leftover parts.
There's always leftover parts.
That's funny.
We put it in a 1 SEU box. It's in your cargo hold.
So
it'll be fine.
While you guys frame the best module from the community ideas, I want to do a quick channel update. We sailed past our $200. Sorry, everything I do on my Twitch and my YouTube is for charity. And the impetus for that charity was the fact that all three of us are veterans. We're all military, and so all monetization from my YouTube and Twitch goes towards stackup.org. And so you can donate directly to StackUp in order to support what they do. They hook up military members and veterans with video games and gaming communities in order to help treat PTSD, help currently serving people get through deployments, being away from friends and family. So it's a really great organization. I highly recommend giving them a follow on Twitch. They do a lot of fun gameplay streams and stuff. That being said, we had a $200 goal initially set for stackup.org, and we blew through that. We met that goal on Tuesday during Pathfinder's podcast, and we just had a $5 donation earlier today from Reindeer Loan, I think it was. So thank you so much for the donation, and I have upped our goal for the Stack Up charity drive to $500. So we're at $205 on our way to $500. So if you want to donate to the cause directly, that's the way to do it. If you hate commercials and you still want to support stackup.org, you can subscribe to this channel. And when I get a payout from Twitch, I will take that money. I haven't gotten a payout yet, but when I get a payout from Twitch, I will take that money and donate it to stackup.org. And that first payout, I need to put that goal on this OBS. So I think if I reach 15 subs on Twitch, especially doing it month to month, from when I started, we will hit our $50 minimum to request a payout. Probably by the end of this year, beginning or towards the end of January, give or take. So if you don't want commercials, you can subscribe to the channel. That money will go towards the payout. When that money gets paid out, I will match that first payout with my own monies. And so we will give $50 of your money plus $50 of my money for a total of $100 directly to Stack Up. So that's what this channel is all about. That's why we do this, besides we enjoy it and it's fun. So that being said, Attira Kell, let's start with you. Which of the community suggestions modules in our list is your favorite? Which one do you want to see the most?
Can I deviate from that question real quick?
Sure.
Well, we got to talk
Maybe.
about are you drinking your space beer tonight?
I don't have any space beer tonight.
Oh,
No.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'm drinking Blue Moon Haze.
Ooh.
All right, which is a hazy, juicy pale ale. It was okay. It was
Nice.
tolerable.
I'm not
have
drinking space beer tonight.
well, my second beer of the night is a double bock beer called Toginator. Trojanator. I don't know. Shit.
Toginator doesn't sound right. I hope it's Trojanator.
I hope it's
Yeah.
Trojanator. Anyway, and
Trojan
Yeah,
man.
there's totally an R in there, man. There's totally an R.
And then this is my Stein. It's going all wonky. But another Prague Stein.
Cool.
Yeah. Anyway, it's all behaving weird. I'll put it above my head. Does that work? Nope. Fuck it. Okay. All right. Anyway, beer. It's good. Space beer. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna deviate from the ones that I put in, because the ones that I put in are combat oriented, and they said we're not going to get combat. Well, it's not a combat ship.
Mhm.
Although I say with the idea of modularity, it could be just less effective than a pure manufactured combat ship. So it could be a Perseus competitor, but it would be a little less effective because you could do other stuff with it too. So that being the case, I will say, see, that's a bit derivative. All right, I'm going to say repair bay, because, right, we have the Vulcan.
You're looking at the third one on our list, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
vehicle repair bay, right? So we have the Vulcan, and we have, what is the what's the big one?
Crucible.
Crucible.
Thank you. The Crucible. We have nothing in between that I'm aware of that strictly does repair. So what I would like to see is, instead of it being like a bay, it would actually be like the Crucible, in that it has lots of spindly arms. So you would just, as the ship, just pull up over the ship that needs repair, or they would pull up under you, and then the arms would like come down and like do the work from the bay, and then all inside the bay is all the materials you would need for repair, right? So you'd have your salvaged, I don't know whatever they're going to call that, salvaged metal that you can then.
There's an acronym for it now. It's someone in
I
chat
you can,
remind us what that acronym is.
and you shoot the stuff out, and it bonds to the hull, and that's
RMC. Yep.
RMC. Yeah, you shoot the RMC out, and the RMC repairs, and then in theory, if it's you'd have additional storage for, like, I mean, it's not going to be like capital class repair, right? But you could have size 1 and 2 components stacked up in your bay that you can then access with the arm, right? And then install into your exterior component fighters and smaller ships, right? And so, you could do, and maybe it's 2 operators to work, and you can go a lot faster than, say, something like a drone, right? Which only has a little bit of fuel. And then you could also do some basic refueling with it, because you're repairing it. You put some gas in the tank and you send them off on their way. It might be a step above what the Vulcan can do. And something like a early mid-tier kind of repair capability.
Yeah. I really, especially because the module on the Galaxy, the module space is open to to the bottom, and we know that for both the medical and the cargo, they've got a lift that goes down, so you could easily make a module that is like that, has that takes that lift space, and instead of having a lift, maybe it's a little bit wider or something, it opens it up so that way that arms can go down kind of like on the Crucible in order to do repair. And maybe because it's a module, it wouldn't be as efficient, as far as cost of operating as the Crucible for providing repair services, but it lets you do that because it's modular. and I think it could look really cool. Almost kind of creepy because that thing would open up and had little crab legs or arms, coming out.
Yeah.
Like some sort of
And there'd have to
weird
be
alien
some type of
crustacean.
hard dock functionality to it, so that kind of
Mhm.
what do we call it? The meshes kind of align and become one, and then so that stuff doesn't
Yeah.
go wonky and weird, and then you could
You could
go
have
in and
some sort of like
do
gravity arms that fold down, create like a
sure.
gantry. Yeah, that'd
Yeah,
be cool.
and then you do your repair work, right? And then, maybe if there's a crap ton of damage or a bunch of components are on the bottom side of the ship and he docked on the top, maybe he has to undock, flip the ship over, and then like redock somehow. And there's like a special
Mhm.
mechanic for that, right? I don't know, but it allows you to kind of to get after that. It's weird, it's wonky, it's industrial, right? It's not combat because they don't want this to be a combat ship, and even though they clearly made a damn Star Destroyer. It's fine. Whatever. Fine. It's super aggressive in design, but they want it to be industrial. So, I mean, that's just an industrial thing they could do with it.
Mhm.
All right.
How
That's what I got.
did he steal yours, or do you have another one that you would really like?
No, I want manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's these rumors
What
that
would
the
you
art.
manufacture? What would you
I think
manufacture?
Oh.
I think it should be like. So here's. I know the. I don't want to get into the details of why necessarily because that'll steal a lot more time. But they got those rumors and leaks of the Argo MCV.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which one is
And
that?
it's a
I
ground
will
vehicle.
find the description because it was.
Is it bigger than
Yeah, it's in a leak.
Is it bigger than the STV? So it's like
We know
PDV,
nothing
STV,
about
MTV?
it. Yeah.
Well, those are the gray cats. We're talking about the Argo.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I'm looking in leaks to see if I can find the description because all we got was the in-game description of it.
So
okay. All right.
Well, so all that it really taught, and it's not a very descriptive leak, but here's what I envision for manufacturing at the base level. The tier 0, tier 1 discussion before. I don't want to get into base building and all that kind of stuff. I think what they're going to find soon, like we talked about, is there's going to be a need for manufacturing the small things like subcomponents, and I would like to see that. The idea that you can manufacture the small things out in space based on people bringing, the necessary crafting materials to you, and you have some limited manufacturing that you could do out there. Honestly, I don't ever want to see this thing as a military ship. I really don't. One, it's got a gross weakness, and I love that about it in the rear fire arc. Like it has no defense back there, and I love that. I don't want this idea that everything has to be a military ship, or at least, what is the phrase they like to use? Punching above its weight class. Somebody's made a joke about that recently, but this thing should be mainly focused on any of the other game loops aside from military. Now, it should have some point defense. I think that's always a thing for a spaceship that's going to be operating out in the black. You have to have some kind of mitigating defense strategy. And don't be wrong, it's going to be real. It's going to be on the pilot if you ever come under fire. To be like, I have to keep them out of the rear of this ship, otherwise I am incredibly vulnerable. So I like the idea of a manufacturing module because I feel like it's got the space, to do some minor manufacturing, at a decent enough level. So I would kind of like to see that. And that's an interesting game loop that I would like to see addressed. Don't be wrong though, repair was second on my list. I like the idea of repair. That's all I got.
So I'll read the others, but we won't talk about it, just so everybody kind of has an idea.
Well, before you do that, I want to talk about
hurry up.
mine. It's my turn.
Oh no, you don't get to. You're the host.
No, you can't rush me. You don't get to. No. Listen here, you, sir.
Yeah, we're guests. We dictate how things run now.
I will let you read the other
Revolution!
ones that we noted, but one thing that I've always wanted is, because the way they described the Galaxy as a support ship, I wanted a module for fleet support. And for that, like I want something where it sort of takes, and Drone Bay is one of the ones that we had, but I want drones that can transfer, munitions to a larger ship. So you've got, in your cargo hold for your Galaxy, um, torpedoes for a Polaris, and you need to get those torpedoes from a Polaris from your Galaxy's hold over to the Polaris, because you're out in deep space, maybe in Vandal territory or something like that, and you need to, um, essentially you're doing underway replenishment. I want a Galaxy module that does underway replenishment, whether they do it with drones or some other way. I think that the drone way was the best way to go, in that the drones can fly and you can have them grab onto something. So, you are
So
able
not
to
as
take
efficient as a Vulcan, but close.
it. Well, it
More
would
efficient
be,
than a Vulcan.
it
It's a
does what a
bigger
Vulcan
capability.
does for replenishment as far as, rearming, but bigger. So replenishing those large torpedoes for the larger ships by carrying them over, into,
Because you could pull from your own cargo hold in that case.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I
is
think
like
you'd almost have to. Half of it would be a
Yeah.
drone bay, half of it
Yeah.
would be cargo, and then you'd have the rear cargo as well.
If you've got, say, 4 drones, and they're all
good point.
for moving large munitions to support your larger ship, whether it's crates of big bullets for your big turrets, or large missiles and torpedoes. It could be larger ships, it could be smaller ships, but have the capacity for those larger munitions that the Vulcan doesn't have the capacity for. Because the way they describe drones, if you want to learn more about drones, go watch our Pathfinders podcast, Droning On About Drones, because we talked about it in detail. But what drones are supposed to be able to do is they can grab onto anything that is a physicalized object and move it. So essentially they can take a missile from, the cargo hold of a Vulcan and fly it over to your Gladius and click it up onto the hard point. And so I want the ability to have the 2 drones click onto a box that is carrying the size 10 torpedo for a Polaris, and then fly it over the Polaris's cargo hold, and up it goes. And now the Polaris has, or however it goes about reloading, maybe there's a hatch that accesses because the Polaris has a torpedo room. There's 4 ready to fire in the tubes, and then there's like 24 more in the magazine that loads them. Well, if there's like a hatch that you can load up into the magazine on the Polaris, or even the Javelin, because the Javelin has size 12 torpedoes, I would like to see something that does stuff like that. Whether it's
That's going
flying,
to be longer than your cargo bay.
Yeah. Well, probably too big for the Galaxy, but for Polaris, or just crates of munitions.
Or
you've got your
any size 9 or size 10
Yeah.
torpedo. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, being able
The
to
size 9s aren't that big.
fly those
That's true.
munitions from your cargo bay over to another ship, like even a Perseus. The bullets, the rounds on a size 7 cannon for those turrets on the Perseus, and you've got 4 of them, have got to be huge. And so you've got to be talking big,
Yeah.
a lot of big crates of ammunition. Well, you get in a big scrape and you need to replenish your ballistics, because it is dedicated ballistics for now. And you're out in pyro. Well, how do you go about rearming? Because we talked about this with logistics. I want a logistics support module, but really, you can put anything in there, but you use drones to move it to the other ship. And so whether it's, beans, bullets, or band-aids, I want that. We have drone bay in there, but I want drone
you want
bay
a logistical
specific.
support bay.
Yeah, similar to Vulcan, but without the refuel and repair. Because I think that would be, if they were going to do a repair module, it would be like what Attira was talking about, where it's specialized and it's closer to Crucible. Versus this would be drone bay for logistical support. The rearming part of the Vulcan, not the refueling. I think if they did a refueling, it would be a separate module. More specific. Versus kind of like they have a refining module, but it isn't a refining and a mining module. There's no mining laser. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You're supporting one aspect of the game loop, not like several.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I got you.
But that's my idea, and I think Nightcobb, you were about to say something before I did mine, or was that you, Attira?
No, that was me.
Okay, go for it.
All right.
You're gonna read what we have on the list,
The
right?
list of the other things that we had. So we had Bounty Hunter Bay, which I said might include interdiction or quantum enforcement, right?
Mhm.
Or interdiction devices, right? And
Quantum
you automatically
interdiction,
hate that, but
quantum.
you know, it could be an interdiction support vessel, right? That just
Yeah,
gives you a larger capability. You might have to rely on
that was
other
my second
ships to
choice. Yeah,
you might have to rely on other ships to actually execute the takedown, but it could support that. Loads of cryotubes, right? So you just fill it up with frozen stiffs. The Explorer Bay, which would you know, I mean, okay, it's not going to be a Carrack and it's not going to be an Odyssey, but it would be an attractive ship to fly around in the verse exploring things from, right? Because it is a pretty ship and you get to do fun things with it, right? And that kind of makes it like an all-purpose ship, almost like multi-role. So you might have a med bay, you'd have a scanning suite, you'd have some other stuff like that. We had drone bay. You added fleet support. I added just now science because I think Salty, a guy in my org, had said something about like it does RSI, and this ship in particular has a very attractive science look. You know, the RSI lines are very clean and sterile, so it could be kind of like a science vessel, right? So mid-tier science vessel. And then for combat, because I know CIG doesn't want it to be combat, and now Nightcobb's going to get angry at me.
I'm not going to get angry.
You could create a torpedo bay in there, right? So that it doesn't have all it is a shot torpedo thing, right? You know, you could create and I only put this in there because a guy in the ammo Discord loves to say this a lot, and I don't necessarily agree with him, but I'm going to say it on his behalf. But some type of fleet support warfare ship, right? Understanding that all Navy vessels have EW capability like built into the vessel, right? Now you
Yep.
can't project that, right? Because you are where you are and you can only project basically to line of sight. That's why we have aircraft that are EW capable. But if you get within, you know, line of sight, that EW is going to kick in for that ship defense, whether he's by himself or whether he's got a fleet. So with him. So every ship is its own EW protection suite. And I strongly encourage CIG to replicate that. Every capital ship should have a crew station that is focused on EW defense, protection, and attack, right?
They won't. That's a complicated business, though.
It is.
You know, as through your recent research, that requires highly specialized, trained individuals to execute EW.
I agree, and we got to figure out a way to gamify it because they already want to. They want to put EW in the game. They want to figure out a way to do it, right? So take inspiration from the video I'm going to release next month.
I'm looking forward to that video, but I'm gonna warn you now. I think they're just going to replace that with hacking.
Which to me is gross because that's a completely different game loop.
I don't disagree with you, but unless you're an EW specialist or you've dealt with EW in the military, you don't understand the difference between the two. And likely the way to gamify that is to take hacking and kind of make that your EW warfare facsimile. Like that's what's going to be. I'm sorry. I'm just bracing you now for reality. That's all I'm doing here. I appreciate you, and don't get me wrong. I love the idea of the EW warfare. It's just not going to be a thing. That's too complicated a thing.
Yeah, maybe.
Unless they've got EW guys on staff. That's what you need.
I have several that would take significant pay increases if they were to get hired.
Yeah,
I'll send you their information, CIG. They would definitely take a pay raise to come over and talk to you about how to make that work. Okay.
That's a lot that's a lot of interesting code they got to write. They're going to have to talk to those DCS kids a little bit.
Maybe that would be good. And then the other thing was just a straight up like combat module, so you could figure out a way to undersling some type of big gun, right? It's poorly thought out on my part, right? It would never be as effective as a Perseus, but it would be a modular combat ship, right? And with that would come components like another size 3 shield generator, probably another size 3 cooler, right? Something to make the ship more combat capable than it is, right? And I think actually for a lot of these things that we've talked about, they might come with an additional component or two as a part of the bay, or at least a slot for it. So if you install your industrial bay, you may be able to install an additional cooler to manage power regulate and power supply and stuff like that. I mean, we don't know how they're going to approach that, but that is a way they could do that. They could approach that. Like it comes with
It
some
could.
intrinsic components. And then you could extend that to combat, but I don't think they will. But that was just things that we all kind of came up with.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think that was it.
Nikon, unless you have any closing remarks for modularity, if you guys are ready, we'll move into our second topic. This one will be a little bit shorter just because we don't have as much. And there's also a lot less from CIG on this. But it's something that we were thinking about.
No, I don't have anything else. I'm ready to move to the second topic.
Cool. So,
so frustrated with me right now. He's like, stop making it a combat ship.
No, not mad at him. I'm just sitting here like,
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
I appreciate your EW conversation, and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, man, wouldn't it be nice? But it's just not gonna. That's not a thing.
I choose to have faith that someone somewhere will figure out a way to gamify jamming, and that's all we need.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great idea, and DCS has kind of got that going. But that's just when you start talking at the ship level, that becomes a whole new level of conversation. And I'm sure you've already figured that out in your interviews. Like that, yeah, I don't want to get into it. That's a military discussion for a different day.
Love it.
I just don't think
put a pin in it.
I don't think that's feasible. Yeah, we can put a pin in it for now.
Put a pin in it.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, but I'm skirting a line, probably already talking from the submarine community.